Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to 76 Boulevard. This is a podcast where Muslims get together to discuss film, TV, fashion, and other forms of art and popular culture. We are parked as usual at the confusing intersection of culture and spirituality. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by the renowned artist Hafsa Khan, who focuses on digital artwork and other forms of art. We'll be discussing her art, her journey in growing alongside her art, and how she uses her art to depict various themes that she feels are important to her life, including spirituality, culture, fashion, and romance, as well as Pakistani identity. So do stick around because it will be a very interesting discussion. Before we start off, please do not forget to subscribe to us on all platforms. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube, and we release an episode approximately every week. So do stick around because we have plenty of good guests coming up. And do not forget, please, to leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us out the channel. Welcome once again to 786 Boulevard. Hasnain, Ali, Hafsa, assalamu alaikum to you all. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Really appreciate it. Hafsa, really appreciate you taking from your time. I've been following you on Instagram for a while and seeing your fantastic work, and really lucky that you have decided to bless us with your presence. But also, I want to thank you publicly on this podcast for the design of our logo and our general branding. I was just telling Hasnain and you before we started that I tried to give it a go before we launched. I tried to give it a go, and basically I just kind of photoshopped a random Hollywood street sign and just put on it 786 Boulevard. It was terrible, but I was like, you know what?
It wasn't terrible.
It was absolutely horrible, and I think I was like, this is the standard I'm going to aim for, and I'm not going to I'm not going to apologize for it. But then when Hasnain was like, hey, I've got a friend, she's a good designer, I was like, okay. I was a bit, skeptic at first because I hadn't seen you or any of your work, but what you came out with was just absolutely fantastic. So I really got to thank you for that and teaching us to aim higher all the time and aim for the best. I think that's very important as well. So I want to start off with the toughest question, and Hafsa, I'll leave you to answer this last because I feel like you've thought about it the most. Hasnain, I'll ask you first. Does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? It's a century-old philosophical question, but hopefully we're gonna answer it right here, right now.
I think as a filmmaker, I think to put it simple, a lot of my films reflect times in my life. So I will say art reflects life.
Nice.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Art reflects life. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That is very interesting because even like when you look at films generally over the past few years, they've become, I feel like, really dark and really sad and really depressing. Even like these big franchise films like your Star Wars films and Marvel films, even they have become dark and depressing because what's happening in America is very dark and depressing, right? So films are always reflective of the time. So in that case, I would say art definitely imitates life. Ali, I'm going to ask you to make the case for life imitating art. Before you answer the question, I know it's very dark where you are, which is weird because you're in the sunshine state, right? You just let everyone know where you are and what's happening, and tell us about your setup right now because I know people are wondering what's going on.
Weird today. I'm literally like using both of my phones to try to get
Oh dear.
But that's not really working out, so I'm gonna stop doing that.
Where are you?
But I am in where am I? I'm in
Florida.
Florida somewhere. Pompano Beach, that's where I am. In Pompano Beach, Florida. I'm on my way down to Colombia. We just did a 54-hour road trip from New York. Stopped off in DC, stopped off in South Carolina, and then Tampa, and now I'm here. I'll be here for a week before going to Medellin. But getting back to what you're saying.
Does life imitate art?
Am I going for or against? Because I think art imitates life.
Okay, go on. Just give us your honest opinion.
I think art imitates life because if you have no life, there is no art.
That's true. So art is a reflection of life, basically, a reflection of the lives that we live.
Yeah.
Very nice. Well done.
Wow.
Ali, he has these one-liners, but they hit with so much wisdom. It's so amazing. Hafsa, does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? So I'm gonna be cheeky. I actually lifted this from your bio on your website, and I thought
Yeah, it
this is a
sounded
good question.
familiar. It sounded
Yeah.
familiar.
So, and I know you've obviously had a lot of time to think about it. So, if someone was to ask you this question, someone turns up, looking at one of your paintings, sees you standing there, and asks you this deep philosophical question, how do you answer it?
I think it's cyclical. So I think art imitates life, imitates art, imitates life. And I think that without both, I think that it follows a pattern and a cycle. So one cannot exist without the other. So anything that we do that is construed as art could not exist without human life, because that's like an obvious biological reason. But I think that sometimes different modes of art reflect the way that we behave in our life. So music changes our mood. Looking at a visual piece of art changes our mood. Watching a different movie changes our mood. And I think that piece of art was obviously inspired by life, but now it is imitating life, which is imitating art. And so
Correct.
I think it's a cyclical thing. And one cannot exist without the other. So I think that sometimes art does imitate life, but life imitates art.
I think that's absolutely a perfect way to put it, and I wholly agree with you, because I think the easiest answer to the question is that obviously art imitates life, because we are artists and we create art, and that's how it works, right? But like you said, sometimes we underestimate just how much we're influenced by art, everything we see around us, by film, like you said, by music, by paintings, by poetry. It almost pushes society to be a certain way. I think especially when we look at American culture, America as a whole is influenced by the music industry, by the film industry, by the art industry. So that is an obvious example of that. But I want to move on to your own work. I want you to give us a brief breakdown of your kind of journey with art. I think that it's sometimes hard to talk about art, especially with an artist, because the easiest thing for any of us to do, and I'd highly recommend whoever's listening, is to go to your Instagram account, give it a scroll and look at your paintings. I feel like that's the foundation of any discussion with an artist. But assuming that we've all taken a look at your art, and we want to get to know the artist behind the art, tell us about your journey with art. What drew you to it, and how you got to where you are today?
So I always start with this anecdote. Whenever somebody asks where the journey began, I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I was writing in a diary. I was a little bit older. I think I was in elementary school, and I was writing in a diary, and it was like a prompted diary. So it was asking, what do you want to be when you get older? What's your favorite color? Who do you hate the most? All those things. And so I was writing in it, and it said, what do you want to be when you get older? And I wrote 2 things. I wrote artist, and I wrote Pizza Hut owner. And so I just wanted to continue doing art for the rest of my life, but I also wanted to own a Pizza Hut because I loved pizza. And I actually came across that diary entry when we were moving about 6 or 7 years ago, and I found it, and I thought it was so interesting that I had written that down and kind of manifested it throughout my lifetime, to be in a space where I can look back at it, be like, yeah, you don't own a Pizza Hut, but you are an artist. And I think that my love for art really sprung when I was a kid, because it was just my favorite subject in school. But I continued to, make art up until I was in high school, when I started taking it a little bit more seriously. And I started off as a ceramicist. So I made pots, worked with clay and sculpture. I competed nationally in ceramics competitions, and pottery was my first love. And then from there, I feel like artists find themselves, or different creatives find themselves, in a box where they're kind of like, I do this thing, and therefore that is the only thing that I can do, because I've kind of labeled myself or categorized myself as this person who does this one thing, when in reality, we can actually expand ourselves outside of that box and explore the different mediums that we do love. But I think, one, we do that to ourselves, where we put ourselves in a box, but society does it as well. And so I think that from there, when I was in college, I started studying Arabic. So my degree is in Arabic, and I became very interested in calligraphy. My love from Arabic calligraphy came from there. I loved the beauty of the language, and I loved the writing itself. And then from there, kind of started exploring watercolor. So it was just like a step by step, like, let me try to dive into all these different art forms and figure out which one's my favorite. And they all seem to be my favorite. And I think that my art kind of goes in phases. So I went from my pottery phase to my calligraphy phase to my watercolor phase. And now over the past 2 years, I've recently discovered digital art. And that's kind of where my journey is at right now. And I don't think that I'll stick to it. I think that I will, I just recently started painting and working with glitter. So maybe that's what I'll do next. So I think that it's an ever changing journey for me. And I think that a lot of creatives should definitely not box themselves in that space. But my journey as an artist has been all over the place.
I think the two most interesting points that I kind of took from your journey, firstly, was that you talking about how you've been exploring different types of art, and you've definitely not settled on one type of art, and you will continue to grow. I think that it is so interesting, because I feel like as artists, I'm sure Hasnain will agree as well, is that sometimes you're just so caught up in the moment, and you feel like what you're doing now is almost what you'll always be doing, right? But you forget about evolving, you forget about growing, you forget about how your art reflects you as a person, and how you as a person continue to grow, so that art itself may change. And also the other point that really kind of stuck out to me was when you remembered when you were young, and you were asked what you want to be when you're older, and you said artist. And I just found that kind of funny, because what I do now generally is I work in videography and editing and kind of in that kind of field. And I went to California to visit one of my cousins who I haven't seen in years and years and years. And he had this old, like, converted VHS tape of me as a young kid, about 5-6 years old. And he said to me, "What do you want to be when you grow older?" And I was like, "Oh, I want to be a filmmaker." And it's crazy, because I completely forgot about that. And I forgot about those aspirations that I had. But like you said, they still continue to influence me as I grow older. Hasnain, what do you kind of think about that? What I have to saying about the journey you take as an artist, both in growing and changing, and also how the seeds are planted at a young age.
Well, also as like a filmmaker, could you kind of elaborate more on how do you not want to, one, box yourself in as a specific kind of actor or genre, but then also how do you jump out of the box of being like a producer, a writer, and an actor?
Yeah.
Man of many talents.
Guess I'm the guest now. So growing up, growing up, I always wanted to be an archaeologist because of Jackie Chan Adventures. I used to watch that growing up. Obviously, that didn't work out.
He used to be an archaeologist.
No, it was a cartoon called Jackie Chan Adventures.
Okay.
But was he an archaeologist?
He was an archaeologist, and he used to collect talismans
and fight people.
And that's why I used to, when my parents would pray, I would just steal while they pray. And like, this is my turban, and these are my talismans. But I think to many points, not to box yourself as an actor. For me, I had to expand out. I couldn't just rely on acting. I started writing. I started producing my own work because that's the only way you'll progress as a whole filmmaker, right? You need to know how each person or each position works. I work with my cinematographer when I'm not acting, and I stand behind my cinematographer. I'm learning how he operates the camera, or I'm learning how the sound boom works, or I'm learning how other aspects of filmmaking works. Because if I'm just going to rely on being an actor, I'm not going to really get far. In today's world, I don't think that's going to happen. And to the other point of not boxing yourself in as a specific actor, I think it comes down to being able to be open enough to explore different themes and genres. For example, if you've done 2 comedic films, what I do is I try to search thrillers or drama or something that's not basically in comedy, and try to go for that. I want my portfolio to have a comedy piece, a dramatic piece, a fighting scene, something that shows me that I'm fascinated in all different areas, because you see that a lot, especially a lot of my friends who are Asian or South Asian. They get pinned to just doing comedy because that's, unfortunately, it's easy for them to just get into comedy. But then it's just like then they tell me, like, I want to do something more serious, I want to be taken seriously. Well, it's tough, because now that's all on your reel, and that's all they see. So the best thing to do is do something that I went about, which is start writing and producing and working with the team to produce your own work. And then that's your portfolio.
I think
So
it's
I have
amazing.
a question for all of you guys. Sorry.
Hafsa's fully taken over as presenter.
Sorry.
No, go for it, please.
So for all of you guys, like, if you are trying to master a trade that isn't yours, so if you're trying to master like writing outside of poetry, if you're trying to master writing instead of acting, or producing instead of acting, do you sometimes find yourself not feeling, one, adequate enough because it's not the trade that you're so skilled and practiced in? Or two, do you think people won't take you seriously because all you've done so far and produced is poetry, a specific kind of poetry or a specific kind of like movie?
I'll answer that first. So it's very interesting you ask that question, because that's something I struggled with for a long time. I remember when I first started writing poetry, and as I keep saying in the podcast, it's not that I'm a poet, it's also that I'm a poet who writes specifically to a Shia audience about the Ahlul Bayt. So it's a very specific niche, right? And I always told myself in my early years that this is all I am. I can't be anything else, because I may confuse people, or you've put yourself out in a certain way, and if, for example, one day you turn up and make a podcast like this, for example, people might get confused, like, what are you doing, right? That was always my kind of mindset in the beginning. But what I realized slowly over the years is that people who are I'll use the word successful, but I also mean, like, successful in a creative world, not like in monetary ways, are those who really embrace every aspect of themselves, right? So, for example, they say the best films are made by people who as Hasnain alluded to, are making films about themselves. I always remember someone like, a few years ago, I was really looking up to The Rock as in terms of motivation, because he wasn't just a wrestler. He was someone who embraced everything he wanted to dive into, right? So he was the greatest wrestler. He conquered Hollywood. He conquered the producing world. He conquered the business world. He put himself in all these different avenues where he felt uncomfortable, and yet he strengthened himself by fixing his roots into these avenues and growing as a person, right? So I think that's definitely something I've tried to do as well. I've definitely failed in many things, but at the same time, I've realized that, as long as I enjoy it, as long as it's something that interests me, I'm always happy to dive in and do it. At the same time, I do feel like there is always a certain standard. So, for example, let's say, Hasnain, if you're, I'm not saying you're not, but let's say, for example, you make films of a certain standard, right? So if you were, for example, if you were, for example, to become something in filmmaking which is not a director or an actor, you would have to be of a certain level, because your acting skills and your directing skills are already on a certain level. So, for example, a lot of people ask me the question, why don't I recite? My voice is horrible. I haven't got a voice at all. A lot of people ask me, why don't I recite? I'm like, if I'm going to step up and recite, it has to be of a certain level. I can't just, come out and recite in a horrible tone when you've achieved certain levels in other things, right? So I think it's all about embracing, first of all, just doing what you love, and expanding. And what's interesting is that each aspect of yourself strengthens the other. So, for example, my poetry is strengthened by my love of film, which is strengthened by my love of filmmaking, which is strengthened by my love of discussing these things, like this podcast, for example. So I think all these aspects of you, the more you kind of grow and diversify, you really grow as a person, which I think is very, very important. Hasnain, do you have an answer? Ali, do you have an answer to this question?
Yeah, I'm going to pass this on to Ali to spread us with some of his wisdom.
I was hoping you would take this one.
Ali, the thing is, you as a person are very diverse as well, right? Because you got, I feel like you're successful in so many fields, number one, from the charity sector, the fantastic work that you do there. Number two, from a business perspective, the work that you do there, your acting career, your modeling career, you do so many things that if I was to look at that on paper, I'd be like, oh, that's a bit random. These are four very different random things, but you're good at all of them, right? So like, what does that tell you about ensuring that, you should always do things that you love, no matter how conflicting they may seem?
It's interesting that we're talking about this as far as like the diversity and then something that might be conflicting or not. On my trip down in the car, I was talking to Wade, and we were talking about how a lot of times you feel like because you're in a certain position in the community or in a particular industry, you have to act and behave a certain way. You have to do certain things because that's what's expected of you from society, from the community. And as soon as you do something different, that's not within their box, as we were talking about, within the box of people's view of what it should be, then they start saying, okay, what's going on? What's wrong with this person? Why not this? Why not? So it goes all back to just doing what you want to do and not necessarily letting society tell you how you have to behave within a certain box, or how you can only do a certain type of poetry, or how you can only do a certain type of art or a certain type of films. Yeah. Because we're taking the perception that people have of us and letting that guide us, as opposed to what's within us guide us to what we want to do.
That's beautiful, profound.
Wow,
well
wow.
And I think what's so interesting, Hafsa, is that, you know, if we, each of us, didn't try to innovate, and I think generally people who innovate and people who try to break those boundaries are the ones who always succeed, because they're so original, because they stand out so much, right? And if each of us didn't innovate, we'll be in very different places. So, for example, you mentioned that, you know, I can't imagine a world where you aren't doing digital art. But, you know, you just said that it was something that you had to kind of like learn and pick up. And I'm so thankful that you did. I wanted to move on to the influence of Pakistani art in your own art. And I actually wanted to speak about a bit of a deeper conversation, which we can all have here because we're all Pakistani, right? Which I think is very interesting. But we're all Pakistani in our own ways, which I think is also very interesting.
Right.
So Hafsa, for example, I read in your biography that you were actually born in Karachi, right? And you moved to Detroit when you were young. Ali, I believe you were born in Pakistan, right? Or you were born in America, or you were born in Pakistan. So I'll start with myself. My relationship with my Pakistani identity is so weird. I don't know if I've discussed it on the podcast before, because my grandparents came to the UK. My mom was born here. My dad came when he was like 4. So when they got married, they were fully British. You know, they spoke English at home. The only thing Pakistani about me was the food we ate. And aside from that, you know, speaking Urdu now and then to my extended family. But I grew up, especially because we weren't a community-based family, but we were just kind of like at home and we'd visit family, and that's kind of like it. We were very British. So I was very detached from my Pakistani identity. I haven't been back to Pakistan since I was like 10. And then when I kind of became religious, I kind of went into the Iraqi community and kind of grew up with them. So I was so detached from my Pakistani identity, and I'm still very detached from my Pakistani identity. So to me, it's something that's almost exotic. When I see, for example, your artwork and the Pakistani influence, it feels like home a bit because it's still a part of my blood and flesh, but it's something I don't understand properly. So it's still quite exotic to me. And that for me is definitely fascinating. But Hasnain, Ali, what's your relationship like with Pakistan? Because I remember you mentioned last time you haven't got any family in Pakistan. Hasnain, you were talking about growing up in mosques and not understanding the language properly. So before I get into Hafsa, I wanted to kind of like explore your relationship with that culture, because I know it's very different for each of us, and I think it's very interesting.
Ali, you're on mute.
Thanks. I do. I'm definitely struggling today. But you know what? I might be struggling, but the view you guys haven't seen, that's amazing. So
all right.
We understand. You are happy. Well done. Good for you.
Thanks. You want to come join? I'm here for a week.
It's been gray skies here for the past week.
So, no, I do have family in Pakistan. My relationship, as we talked about it before, to me, it's just another country. Even though I was born there, I went to school there. I moved here when I was 5. And in between, my dad actually took me back there a couple of times so I can attend school. So I speak Punjabi, I speak Urdu, I speak English fluently, all three the same. And when I do go back there, I speak like a local, like I never left. And in that sense, it's good, but in the sense that I have to follow certain protocols of being a Pakistani, I have to only eat biryani or dal chawal or whatever it may be. Like, you know, in that sense, or the culturally, like it's like whatever. Like I'll go for Mexican or Pakistani, it's all the same in that sense.
That's interesting.
I'm hungry.
Hasnain, what are you?
For me, both my parents obviously are from Pakistan. Growing up, I didn't have much of my of Pakistani influence. I did learn the language, like Ali said, I'm fluent in Urdu. Well, I mean, Hafsa will probably disagree with that, but my Urdu is pretty good. My Punjabi is better. So it's funny because like when I speak to Ali, it's a lot in Punjabi. I'm mostly like just yelling at each other in Punjabi because it's funny. But so I learned the language, but going to like Al Khoy Masjid here, which is like a heavy Pakistani influence. I was this detached from it because growing up, there was no Pakistanis around in school or in my neighborhood. So the only times I would be around people like myself would be at the mosque, which is like, let's be honest, like during Muharram or Ramadan, right? But as I got older and I went to Pakistan a few times, I realized like, oh my God, there's a whole world missing. And then as I got older and hit college, that's when I started understanding that this is my tradition. This is kind of what we do. This is what my dad, loves about Pakistan. Because I just recently found out, not recently, but like a few years ago, that my dad's from Multan in Pakistan, which Ali gave me a whole lesson on what Multan is, the city of saints in Pakistan.
So you're a saint.
So, I mean, I don't like to brag about it.
He's from Queens. You're from Queens. What saints are in Queens?
No,
I was actually born there in Multan.
Oh, nice.
All right.
Okay, I'm out my league here. You guys are all saints. I'm sorry.
All right. So, to come to the end of my discussion here. Basically, I didn't hit my Pakistani roots till I got older and I understood it, and I started wearing like shalwar kameez, and I started embracing the clothing culture, and then I started embracing like Pakistani fashion, which I think it's nice. It's really nice. And then I just started accepting the culture more. But then I got even older, and then I hit a point where, all right, is it my religion or is it my culture? Because we always hit that snag where we mix the two, and for me, that's kind of where I am right now. It's like what's above what do I do in this, that, and the. But right, like as of today, yeah, I am more interested, more into Pakistani culture. I do want to go visit Pakistan and travel around. Probably not right now, but in the future, I love to just take a road trip and see all of the country. And I think it's a big part of me that I want to explore and film, and I think that doing that will just fulfill me and fulfill my art.
It's crazy because I don't think I could have grown up more apart from Pakistani culture or from Pakistani identity, but somehow, some way, like I said, the language, the kind of like the smell of the food, even just seeing Pakistani people speaking your language, I feel that sense of home, and I can't escape it no matter how much not that I try, but no matter how much I try, I can't escape it, despite the fact that I grew up without it. So that being said, Hafsa, I want to kind of get your perspective, because I think your story is the one of a lot of friends I have in America, and a lot of Pakistani Americans in general who grew up in Pakistan and came over to America, often when they were old enough to understand that they were moving. So what was it like for you, and what's your relationship like with Pakistan?
So not to disappoint you, but I came here when I was 2 months old, so I didn't really know what was happening.
That whole discussion is just fully cancelled.
But I will preface that by saying that I didn't learn how to speak English until I was 5. So I lived in a very Urdu-heavy speaking household. My mom's family lives in New York, and so when we would be visiting when I was younger, she would leave me with her cousin. And my khala, who spoke no Urdu, was like 11 or 12 years old, and I was like 5, and she was taking care of me. I can only speak Urdu. She can only speak English. We can't communicate. Wow. And so she would be babysitting me, and I remember that she tells me these stories now. She's like, it was so frustrating because I just couldn't talk to you, so we did charades the entire time. And I remember being in kindergarten and not being able to speak to my kindergarten teacher. When she asked like what day of the week it was, we were learning the days of the week, and I just couldn't tell her because I didn't know. And so but obviously I learned English now. I'm speaking to you in it, but my story is a little bit more so of somebody who was very well connected to their culture, and therefore shapes a huge part of my identity. Pakistani culture was something that raised me and still does today. I still learn so many new things about the culture and the people. I speak Urdu fluently, and I'm actually now learning how to read and write in it, which is something that my mom tried to teach me when I was a kid, and I hated it. And I spent so much time learning Arabic in college and became so acquainted with it, speaking wise and then reading wise, especially Islamically, that I kind of forgot about, my mother tongue, which I can speak, but I can't read and write in. So I'm trying to get literate in it. But that aside, my household is very Pakistani. I am very much connected to Pakistani music, Pakistani culture, Pakistani food. And so it shapes different parts of my life. But that doesn't mean that I cannot be, just like as me living in the United States, a aware person. That doesn't mean that I can't be hypercritical of where I live now and where I'm from. Being Pakistani, I think, is very different, especially today. Being an American is very different today because these cultures and values and beliefs that these countries were founded on are obviously not being enacted or represented to their people and their society, the people that we are meant to protect and serve. We are not protecting and serving in this country and also overseas, right? You can't be a religious minority, you can't be a woman and walk around freely over there.
Yeah.
And over here, it's extremely difficult to be a Muslim, but especially on top of that, a Black American. And so I think that it's one thing to love your culture and your identity and where you came from, but it's also another thing to be critical, because you can do both at the same time of where you're from and where you live. You can still love who you are, but still be critical of the institutions that built it. And so that's kind of where I'm at with my identity right now. And also, these influences, because they very heavily influence my art. But I also think that they very heavily influence my personality too.
How much of a role would you say Pakistani art plays in the art that you do? And I think what's so interesting about art is that, when it comes to Pakistani, like the style of Pakistani art, I'm clueless. I'm not sure what the mathematics of it are and the logistics of it. But what's amazing about art is that like I spoke about sense and smell and how things sound. When I see your artwork, I can immediately tell there's Pakistani influence. That's what's so beautiful about visuals, right? So what influence does it play, when you sit down to draw something or design something, and how much of it is apparent in your artwork?
I think this goes back to that conversation we were having earlier, which I think is going to keep coming up in this conversation, is that you can only succeed and be good at the things that you love, right? Because if you don't love it, then you're not going to be great at it. And that's something that that's advice that I give to other artists. It's advice that I give to anybody, is that if you are true and authentic to yourself and what you love and hold dear to yourself, then you will find yourself practicing it, becoming skilled in it, manifesting it in a way which is very apparent and true to yourself, and doesn't come off as fake. And so I think that just looking at my art, you can definitely see that this person who creates this work is very much heavily influenced by their heritage. And that my heritage has become this huge, because it's an everyday part of me, right? Like I wake up in the morning and I speak in Urdu to my family, and I have Pakistani food, and then I'll listen to some Bollywood music, and it's not inherently Pakistani, but it's the same language. It's virtually the same culture. And so those influences have found themselves manifesting themselves in my artwork, whether I think about it consciously or subconsciously, it happens. And so instead of fighting it, I've embraced it, and if not, celebrated it.
I think another thing that's so interesting when we kind of scroll, when I scroll through your Instagram and see your art, is just how much diversity is in everything that you kind of create. It's all kind of like the same aesthetic, but I noticed, for example, religion, fashion, sneakers, culture, and romance. And I think what's so interesting is that they're just so. We spoke about diversity in our passions earlier, but it kind of represents to me diversity in character, and I think for me, Hasnain and Ali, that's what this podcast is about. Each episode is about something completely different and bonkers. And Hasnain, I keep mentioning this with every guest that we have, but I still can't believe we did a whole 1 hour episode about Islam and sneaker culture. But that ultimately is, us exploring our passions and kind of seeing where it fits in with religion, which I think is what Hafsa you do. So how do you decide what you want to focus on, and why would you say there are these specific themes that are so evident? So focusing on religion, fashion, culture, romance, those four, which I kind of picked up myself.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you say those four are prevalent more than anything else? And
Well,
how do you decide? How do you decide what to focus on?
They're huge parts of my personality. So I was just having this conversation with someone the other day. A lot of people come to me as a like public artist, and they ask me to draw specific things. They're like, I would love to see more of this in your work. I would love to see more of that in your work. Like, why don't you draw people that look like this? Why don't you draw this kind of dance form? Why don't you draw this kind of like clothing? And I think that it's so nice that people want to see themselves represented in my art style, but I would never do that because it's not me. And so I'm literally just drawing what I love, right? And so I am heavily influenced by faith, and spirituality is a huge, huge portion of my work. And I wanted to kind of explore it outside of the confines of calligraphy, which is what I did for a really long time when I was in school because I was studying it. But I wanted to kind of intertwine all of those things that you just mentioned in a way that was very encompassing of my personality, so that when you look at this art, you know that not only is it in my style, but it's also from me, because it is things that I truly love and know about. I draw sneakers because I love sneakers. I collect them. I have a bunch right there.
Nice.
I draw. I should have been on the sneaker episode.
We'll bring you on another one for sure.
I draw things that I draw like Bollywood because it's very important. Well, not important to me, but it's very inspirational to me. Like music, Bollywood culture, Bollywood, the culture that's portrayed, but also the costumes, the jewelry, the storylines. And then finally, romance is so important to me. I'm a Scorpio, and I don't know if that means anything to you, but it's a very big part of my zodiac sign. And although I'm like not a crazy astrologist, it's something that I do follow. And like when you went into my room when I was a kid, I had two posters. One was of dinosaurs, the other one was of my zodiac sign. And I still love dinosaurs, still love my zodiac sign. And so romance is also such an important part of my work. And I think it is really important to explore and have conversations about within the confines of our culture, but also within the confines of our faith. It has been such a taboo topic. And I think that one should not be. But two, I think people who look like you and I deserve to see themselves represented in that way. Because when you go into a museum and you see sensual artwork or artwork that depicts romance, you typically see the same kind of person or the same kind of couple. And I think that it's very important to kind of highlight representation in that way, because we as humans all experience love and romance and would like to see it portrayed in art form. We hear it in music, we see it in film. Why not be able to see it the same way in art, you know? So all those things are very important to me.
You reminded me of an article that I read recently. It was co-written by Riz Ahmed and I believe one filmmaker that he works with, and they were basically kind of listing their favorite films and the films that they influence, and the filmmaker opened it with a line that really kind of spoke to me within the confines of film itself. And he was like, film, you know, he goes, much like I'm just paraphrasing what he said. He goes, much like the Sufi perspective, for us film is a place where everyone can exist, where both the believer and the kafir, both the practicing one and the one who hates or who doesn't practice. So his point was that film should be a place that represents, you know, so many different kind of perspectives on life, but at the same time they kind of coexist in this one medium, which I think is really interesting. And also, as someone who's also obsessed with dinosaurs, I have to ask you that you need to draw some dinosaurs at some point. Please, I would love to see that. So that's a request. I hope that's a request that you can actually kind of agree with. Hasnain, Ali, I'm going to put you both in the hot seat right now. I think this is very important. What do you guys feel?
Before you go, dinosaur and a Sherwani.
A dinosaur and a Sherwani.
All right.
A dinosaur can't fit in the Sherwani due to the dimensions of the animal. It wouldn't. When I said dinosaur geek, I wasn't joking. You can't.
The dinosaur into what he can wear.
you can't. Dinosaur doesn't. Have
We'll
you
put
seen
the
a?
dinosaur in a setting that seems, not where it should be. We could put the dinosaur like in South Asia somewhere, and then it'll
Oh,
be
that's
my art.
nice. I like that.
A
That's
dinosaur in
nice.
Multan.
A dinosaur in front of the Taj Mahal.
A dinosaur in Queens, New York, just walking around. I think that would be.
There's plenty of dinosaurs here. Don't have to worry about any of that.
Rats
Hasnain.
don't count.
Oh my God! Wow. Hasnain, Ali, let's
Yes.
put you guys in the hot seat. What do you guys feel when you scroll down Hafsa's Instagram and see her pieces of art? Ali, I'll give you time to scroll through the Instagram account. Hasnain, Hasnain, how does Hafsa's art make you feel? The reason I'm asking. Sorry, Ali, what? Say that again.
I think it's very authentic with some modern twist to it. So you have some Pakistani and some American culture infused into it. That's what I see when I see it.
That's interesting. The reason I was asking both of you, because I entered this conversation by talking about what I kind of picked up from it. So I was interested to see what you guys picked up from it as well. Ali, that is a very important point and one that I didn't want to discuss. Hasnain, what do you kind of pick up from Hafsa's artwork?
I pick up a few things. One, definitely spirituality is there. I pick up on a lot of like the calligraphy, the shrines, the female Sufi painting that she drew, which is like probably like something that a lot of people love. It's probably one of her most popular stuff based on likes. And I when I see somebody who's so in like how do I say this? I'm trying to pick the right words. But when somebody's like so like in like deep within spirituality, where everything they do within themselves is like a reflection of God. Right? I kind of see that in her artwork. I just see like every piece of artwork you see is a bit of herself and a bit of God, right? Because as the famous quote says, if you want to know your Lord, then know yourself, and then you'll know your Lord. And I think that's the best way for me to put her artwork. It's like she knows herself, so she knows her Lord.
That's beautiful.
That's
because
a lot of pressure.
I think that's beautiful, because I feel like creative art is in many ways the most authentic version of ourselves, the most authentic part of ourselves. I wouldn't say that all of us is in all of our artworks, but it's definitely a magnifying glass of the most authentic part of ourselves. So if Hasnain, what you're saying is true, that's actually big praise for Hafsa, which obviously I don't doubt is true. I did, Hafsa, want to talk about what Ali mentioned, which was the way you kind of play with both Pakistani and American culture. So for example, you have that image that I just love, which is the Jordan 1s sitting with the hoop right by them, right? And that for me is literally American culture drawn through Pakistani kind of lens. So do you intend to blend these two cultures together, or is it just something that kind of comes out? And how would you say your art is reflective of these two identities, if at all?
I think that's a really good question. I think that both. So it finds itself manifesting itself subconsciously, but then also it is intentional at the same time. But I think that it is also very uniquely me. And I think that every time I go ahead and like do something like this, it always makes people like kind of do a double take or question like, hey, like, how did that happen? And I think that always goes back to the fact that us as Pakistanis or first generations in America, but also the same probably in the UK, is that we all have a hyphenated identity. And so we all carry these like multiple hyphens. So like I'm a Pakistani, Muslim, American, woman, artist. And so it's all these different parts of me that are part of my identity, and they're all hyphenated because they all belong to the same person. And I think that manifests itself in my personality, but also in my artwork. And I think it is definitely intentional, but it kind of pokes out here and there subconsciously too.
How much of yourself would you say you discover when you're designing? Because I feel like art is a way to kind of explore the deepest, darkest parts of yourself, your fears, parts of yourself that you didn't realize were there, things that you've been struggling with. Is that something you face in your journey as an artist, or is it just kind of like more superficial than that?
I think that the way that I've found myself through my art is challenging my skill level. So it hasn't kind of been thematic or anything like that. Like I haven't had my breakthrough where I'm like just drawing and then I find myself drawing something that I didn't intend to set out to do. I haven't had that moment yet. But I think that every time I do something different, it's learning myself through my skill. So I'm like, hey, it's like I've unlocked a new level. Like, oh, I know how to do this now, or oh, I can do this now. I can manipulate this to be this way. And so every time that I do something like that, I'm constantly reminded of the growth that I'm exhibiting just by continuing to practice, and the sheer amount of work that I'm always doing. I am always drawing, I'm always painting, I'm always doing something. And I think that every time that I discover that little bit about me, I see the growth, which is always a really great thing.
One thing we've kind of been alluding to the whole conversation, and I feel like I just want to ask you straight out, is the relationship between Islam, spirituality, and your artwork. So how much of your faith and what you believe in Islam kind of manifests itself in your art? I don't just mean like in a very obvious way. So for example, you have like the paintings of for example, the calligraphy, the shrines, the Sufi images as well. I think there's things that are quite obvious, but just generally sitting down, and I kind of try to ask this question to every guest that we have. When you sit down to carry out your passion, is it a case of you're like, okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, this is what I'm doing for God now, I'm intending this is my ibadah, my worship, and I'm going to go ahead? Or is it something more kind of like subconscious than that? Tell me about the relationship between spirituality and your artwork.
I think definitely when you find yourself moving or working with the intention that you're doing it as an act of worship, it adds barakah to your work in a different way. And I think that it radiates a little bit more differently. If I look at something that I've done intentionally and compare it to something that I just did on a whim, it looks very different to me and it feels very different to me. I have a feeling connection with my work, and that's why a lot of the times when I post things on my social media, people automatically assume that everything is for sale. Not everything is for sale, right? Like it's only specific pieces that I think that people should be able to own in their homes that are perfectly acceptable for them to have. But there are certain pieces that are only acceptable for me, and they were made for me, and they were very intimately done by me, and will continue to only be for me. And I know that may sound a little bit selfish, but I think that has a lot to do with my interpersonal relationship with God. And I think that it definitely finds itself manifesting in subconscious ways, but I do want to say that it also manifests itself in the not so apparent pieces, especially in the romance. I think that there are very apparent pieces like, hey, this was a painting of a mosque, and so very clearly it is Islamically inspired. Yeah. But I have a lot of pieces. I love to draw hands. And one of my favorite paintings, like my love for hands, I don't think I've ever discussed this with anybody publicly, but my love for hands actually came from that Michelangelo painting in the Sistine Chapel, where he draws God and human reaching out to one another. And I think that was such an important part of my artistic education, that it kind of manifested itself in my work. But then also, hands are so important to South Asian culture, especially in dance. Dance in Hindu religion is considered a form of worship, which I think is also such a beautiful thing, because I think music, poetry, and art are all forms of worship. And especially if you set out with the intention to do it so that way. And so that my love for hands kind of have, been pop arty, contemporary, or we're talking about something, or I'm drawing something that is like very apparent, like, hey, this hand is meant to be doing something. But then I have all these images of hands that are like, when you look at them, you're like, I never thought that I would look at two hands and think, hey, this is kind of romantic, but it finds itself being that way. And a lot of it has to do with romance, religion, and the relationships that you find in the history of Islam between Islamic characters in our books and in our histories, but also between the romantic love between you and God, because romance doesn't have to be sexual. Romance can exist in different ways. Romance can exist You know, with friendships, romance can exist with your relationship with your family, romance can exist with God. And so I think that it finds itself in all aspects of my work across the board.
I think that's absolutely profound and beautiful, especially when you talk about how romance isn't specific to man and woman, but also can be with God or with friends or with saints or whatever. And I think that's just so it speaks to me so well, because one thing I mentioned on this podcast before is that personally I feel like what I've kind of, after reflecting on my creativity and why I do what I do, I feel like everything, especially my poetry, is there obviously on a very obvious level to connect with figures who are loved by God and the Holy Prophet. But on a deeper level, I feel like it's also me trying to explore something which I don't understand completely, which is the idea of love. Something that is something that's been discussed for centuries, but me on a personal level, I feel like it's something that I it's a subject of intense discussion and debate inside me throughout my years, trying to understand what it is to love, what it is to be loved, what is love in itself, which I think is very interesting. And definitely what you've kind of showed me, maybe understand, is that love, like you said, is beyond what it is, what we obviously think of it. It's beyond romance between a man and a woman. It's also love between, as you said, yourself and God, yourself and your friends, yourself and your family, but also love between you and your art. Love between, I'm sure you understand that, I'm sure you'll agree with me, that when you produce a piece of art and it's final and it's done and the ink is dried, you take a look at it, there's a sense of love then what you have created, almost as if it's a real person and you love that person, right? Which I think is so interesting. Hasnain, leading on from that, I wanted to kind of just winding down, I wanted to ask you about your own kind of connection with what you create. I just mentioned to Hafsa about how we create almost a relationship with everything we create once it's finished, right? So me, for example, I know for a fact that once I've finished a poem, I'll read over it again and again and again. I don't want to say it, I don't want to say to admire it, because it might come off as a bit arrogant, but it is to admire what I have created, and
right.
In a very humble way, to say, look what I've created through the will of God, kind of thing. Or for example, I'm sure you're aware, I know this too, when I've finalized a video which I'm very happy with, or like, would it be a promo or kind of like any sort of video, I watch it over and over and over, and just kind of like bask in what my sweat and blood and tears has gone into. So what kind of relationship do you have with what you create?
I think for me, I have to separate the two. If it's a project which I put my money, my blood, sweat, and tears in, something of my own work, it's different than if something that I go and audition and I get the role for, right? They're both unique in their own sense, because one, and Ali can also speak to this, when you go to an audition and you like not fight, but like when you go up against other people and you win that role, and then you get a chance to put yourself into a film, like that's a win, and that's like alhamdulillah for that, right? And then when I am like the big dog who can create something and brings in a team for that, it's more like there's that business aspect to it too, right? Because at the end of the day, what are you trying to do here, right? So most of my short films is me trying to put my identity and my faith in my films, and for that's a bigger win for me. In the projects I do, whereas the projects that I just simply act in, I'm just thanking God for giving me the opportunity to be here and do that. But the films that I'm actually creating, I'm creating that for a bigger calling, I guess. And to me, that means a lot more. That's where I'm more connected to who I am and what I'm doing. But then you have to separate the aspect of the art and the business, right? Because part of it is a business, and my mindset is just like, all right, how far is this going to go? Is it going to go in film festivals? But then, like, is the message that I'm trying to actually give, going to, be received well? So, as a filmmaker, that's kind of how.
Can I reframe the question? Can I ask, when you guys create something, whether it be art, whether it be a poem, whether it be a project that you've done, Ali, or whether it be an event that you've put on or whether it be a film, once you create it and it's out there for consumption, how do you deal with the ownership? So how do you feel that once it's out there for public consumption, it's kind of no longer yours? And people see themselves in it, people reshare it, people interpret it and perceive it in ways that you didn't intend for it to be perceived or consumed. How do you kind of deal with that as an artist? But then also, how do you tie that back to your spirituality? Because what you create, if you're a spiritual and God conscious person, if you create it with the intention that, you know, God gave you the skill, the brains, and the power to create this work, it wasn't really yours to begin with. And so how do you feel once that ownership is gone? Because as human beings, we want to control everything.
I think if I can go first, I think it's very interesting. And I've had this kind of debate with some of my friends about, you know, the just digging deeper into that question, the relationship between creating and sharing. So, for example, some questions that a few people have posed me in the past is that why can't you just create it and leave it? You know, put it like under a desk somewhere and not release it at all? Because if you're creating it for the public, are you not then creating it, you know, for the likes or for the attention or for the shares or what have you? And I think for me, the sharing is a big part of that spiritual journey. You know, I feel like what it is for me is that writing it is one thing, but sharing it is there to help people, to support people, right? And that's some feedback I've gotten, you know, over the years that I've been doing this. And it's interesting because I grew up with social media. So as my passion grew from the very beginning, the first poem that I wrote, I shared it. The second poem that I wrote, I shared it. The third one, this is like 10, maybe 12, 13 years ago. So I've always been sharing the stuff that I've been doing. But for me, it's like, you know, it's there to help people. And I've had conversations with people where I'm like, hey, when you see my poetry on your timeline, for example, is it annoying, or is it, you know, that is it annoying to always see my stuff, for example, in your timeline? How do you feel? A lot of people have told me, you know, this poem, this couplet helped me. This poem uplifted me. It brought me closer to God, closer to Ahlul Bayt, closer to spirituality. It made me happy in my day, etc., or inspired me to do my own thing. So for me, this is my kind of way of helping people. It's my kind of way of giving back to the world. You know, they say it's important to be to have a bit of selflessness in your life and help people in order to spiritually grow. And this is me, how I worship God and how I help people. That's my kind of avenue. And in terms of creating it, sorry, your question about creating it was what was the first part of your question?
So how do you feel about the ownership once you've created it and then somebody's consumed it? How do you feel that it's no longer yours, but then the intention behind creating it, if you're doing it for, you know, the sake of Allah and you're doing it God consciously, was it even yours to begin with?
For me, it's honestly like creating or a carpenter creating, I don't know, a chair or a table that you're going to give to someone and it's going to be in someone else's house and you're never going to have ownership of it, right? I think once you post it out there, once you've already let go of it, it'll always be yours. And, you know, almost as if it's your child, you know, it's your child, but that child has to grow and grow older and do his own thing in life. So for me, that's definitely how I see it. When I'm in the process of creating it, it's definitely very intimate for me. It's part of me. It's me and this creation only. But the minute I let it go, it becomes one with the world, you know. And what I've been doing recently is when I share something, for example, on Instagram, I'll just kind of close my phone, put it away and not check the reaction or likes it's getting, because it doesn't matter whether I see the likes coming in or I see the feedback or I don't, it's out there now. So it's just for people to kind of interpret in their own way. Hasnain, did you want to answer this question?
Yeah, I would just, you know, I agree with you in a lot of aspects. So the question that came to my head, and I want to ask, you know, all three of you, is when you create something, like Nouri, for example, if you create, you know, a poem, you know, that's you and you created it, it's original, it's nobody else has written something like this, and you post it, and then, you know, you see somebody else creating a poem, and do you ever get that, like, this is similar to what I did, or this is an exact of what I did, Do you find that as more like, hey, I motivated this individual to write this, or do you see like, oh, this is kind of like, just taking what I did and like rebranding it?
Hafsa, I'll let you answer first.
Yeah, I'll let you answer.
This is a very long conversation that I feel like I could have a separate podcast about. But I think there's a very big difference between influencing somebody and copying somebody, and I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Wow, I feel like there's a lot of. Give us a bit more. I feel like there's a lot of sentiments in there, and we do want to hear. You don't have. I mean, if you want to vent, go for it. But I'm honestly just very interested to see your perspective. If not specific to you, but in a general sense as well.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it has to, like, a lot of the internal struggle I had once I started gaining a larger following on social media was that I've been doing this for a lot longer than a lot of people have, and I didn't realize that I had pioneered the movement of creating this kind of work in a virtual space until I had done it, right? And you never find yourself being the voice of something or the representation of something until it's actually just happening to you. And you're like, wait a minute, how did I become the authority on this? But I think that because I had kind of explored this style of work and this content of work before a lot of other people had, that I had kind of set in motion the blueprint. And I didn't have a blueprint. I kind of just like, went for it and kind of threw myself out there. And I think a lot of that a lot of the baggage that comes with realizing that is that you have to be okay with the fact that you now no longer own this. I'm sure Andy Warhol saw, like, he was like the first, like he was a pioneer of the pop art movement. And I'm sure like right after he died, there was just like a huge uptick of people creating pop art. And I'm sure that if he were around to see it, he would have been like, this was my work. This was my style. I pioneered it and coined it. How dare these people kind of take it on as their own? And I think that it was a struggle for me to let go of that. Just because I did it first doesn't mean I'm the only one who can do it. But then there's obviously a huge difference between being influenced by somebody's work and then just blatantly copying it. And I think that we live in a time where it's very easy to copy someone else's work. And it's frustrating as an artist because you're being authentic to yourself. And then you see somebody trying to recreate your work and they're being inauthentic, and it's very clear because it wasn't them who came up with the idea. The problem that I run into as an artist, but also a business person, is when people try to profit off of it. And that is something that I've been struggling with and dealing with over the past couple of months. It's just gotten more and more rapid to the point where I see it happening sometimes and I just have to ignore it because I can't keep addressing it. But that's not to say that I won't ever stop addressing it, because it was mine. So I'm going to address it. And I think that's probably stopped a lot of people because I do it publicly. I'm like, hey, listen, this isn't okay. And I'm going to be vocal about it. Because that goes back to a conversation of where women don't feel ownership of themselves or their work, but also feel kind of afraid to talk about it. And that's something that I'm very passionate about, is women being able to do that. And so I think that I'm going to leave the conversation at that there is a difference between copying and influencing. And influencing is very hard when you're actually doing it. And it's very hard to, when you have a controlling personality, and as human beings, we want to be able to control and have some sort of certainty in front of us. When you travel into the unknown, it becomes more difficult. And that's just something that I'm struggling with and dealing with right now.
That's so interesting. I definitely have my own kind of perspective on it, because when I first started, or just first kind of started gaining traction, people who were writing poetry, again, I keep saying this, I'm in a very specific niche, right? So when it comes to people who write poetry about the Ahl Bayt in English online, the circle is very small, or at least was very small back then. And people who were doing that basically. They were just doing what I do, and just kind of copying the exact same style. My style is very, very specific because it's based on, the old classic Urdu / Iraqi style of writing poetry, but it's in English, right? So people are trying to do the same thing, and I don't believe it was very successful. So I was always seeing that. I don't know if it ever bothered me. I feel like, I do want to echo what you said, was that I always told people, look, it's important to be true to yourself, and kind of write in a way that's true to you. You can't write in a way that someone else is writing in, because that's not you, that's me, right? Which I think is very important, which I think now when you look at the sphere that I'm in these days, is very different. People are writing true to themselves. I can think of 4, 5, 6, 7 poets on Instagram who are just, doing fantastic work, and are really, and each type of poetry is very different to the others, all very diverse, right? When it comes to copying, I remember there was one time where there was basically a guy in our community who was sending my poems on WhatsApp and just saying, "Oh, my son wrote this poem." Some random guy, literally just kind of saying that. and I've it's funny because like I think I'm very kind of blessed in that I've always kind of not been very worked up on it, because one thing I learned very on from an Islamic perspective is that when you do good and you keep it hidden, people will always find out about it. It's like a divine law in Islam. Whenever you do good, if for example you give charity in the dark of night and don't tell anyone, people will always eventually find out about it, which is something I've always tried to live by, and something I've seen itself manifest all the time. So because I have that kind of perspective, I always try and think 10, 20, 30, 40 years down, even looking further down to Judgment Day, when everything is kind of like out there in the open. When I have that perspective on things, it doesn't bother me as much. Even like getting a bit deeper, thinking about disputes that I've had with people, arguments that I've had with people where I feel like I'm, for example, in the right. I try not to let it upset me, or people who've outright attacked me. I try not to let it get to me and upset me, because I have that context of, okay, one day there'll be a Lord who will all stand before, and he will say, you did this injustice to Nouri, and they'll be out there and open, and the Lord will judge it, right? So having that perspective for me definitely puts things into context. I know we're getting a bit deeper than the question was, but I think it's important to talk about that, because it's easy to let things get to us. It's easy to let someone who's selling our property, which is outright wrong, it's easy to let it kind of like peck away at our minds. And Hafsa, you mentioned that it's something you're struggling with. I struggle with things like that all the time. Not when it comes to poetry and plagiarism, stuff like that, but I do struggle with how people perceive me. I do struggle with someone who I think is upset with me or doesn't like me. It's something that especially this year, I've had to grow out of and ensure that I don't live by people's standards or expectations and leave it all to God. I think that's very important. So I went really off topic there, but I think Ali, we missed you. I know you went to pray namaz before the sun went down, but we basically just went completely off topic. We started speaking about people that have upset us and who will never forgive until Judgment Day. That's where we are right now. So if there's anything you want to get off your chest, just now's the time to do it. Throw it in the works.
I don't know where to go with that. I just finished praying and you guys are talking about not forgiving people.
I don't mean not forgiving people, but I mean like people who've upset us.
Happen to forgive people as fast as you want God to forgive you.
Wow, what a line.
Wow.
See, Ali
doesn't talk much. Ali doesn't talk much, but when he does,
Ali is the most valued person on this podcast, because he just comes in, he'll be like, one line of wisdom, and then sit back, and then that's it. He's just conquered the whole thing. Winding it down, Hafsa, I want to ask you the final question, which is, what advice would you give to aspiring starting artists, both like in terms of how they can go about learning how to draw and design, and also from like a level of how to share their artwork and how to even monetize it as well, and how they should grow, and how they can grow to reach a stage like yourself?
So back to what we've been talking about this entire time, authenticity. So if you're creating something that is authentic to you, you're going to be good at it. It's going to shine through, and people will see, and it'll be something that hasn't been created before or has been created before, but is from your perspective, lens, and style, which doesn't exist because there's only one of you, as cheesy as that sounds. Two, monetizing and gaining some sort of following from your work is the most annoying answer is to just be consistent, which I know doesn't really make any sense. But if you're consistent with the work that you produce and you want it to be shared on a platform where you can gain some sort of following or monetize from it, then you're going to have to be consistent, because people like to see work from the same person consistently. If you're going to take a really long break, or you're going to like not, you know, talk about your work or not post about it, or and that people do that. I did that for a while. You're going to find yourself kind of in a place where you don't have like a following or a fan base. And if that's something that you're looking for, then you're going to have to maintain consistency in your work. And then kind of like from a technical level, I'm not the best person to ask, because I literally taught myself how to do everything. I taught myself how to draw on an iPad. I taught myself how to paint. I taught myself how to draw. And so technically I can't share any wisdom there, but I will say we live in the age of technology, and there are so many different resources and people out there that can impart their wisdom. And something that I want to share, or something that I'd like to send out there for my fellow creatives who are in a place like me, we have to give back and invest in those who are trying to create a space like ours for themselves, because we have so many different spaces where people are starting businesses, or people are trying to gain trying to get somewhere with their creativity, and they need people to invest in them. And I don't mean just monetarily, but emotionally, and they need people to invest in them with mentorship. And we need people like us to be able to invest, whether we're providing capital, whether we're providing our time, resources, wisdom. We can't withhold information. That is, and if we're, you know, right, like if we're being spiritually guided and God conscious about it, then that is almost sinful to withhold your information if someone's asking. And I think that that would be hypocritical of us as people who maintain that sort of spirituality and want to continue on that path, for us to withhold that information from the younger generation who are trying to pursue the same things that we're doing, but need that guidance, because we are all we have. And if your people can't invest in you, then who else will?
Yeah.
Beautiful way to end it. Hafsa, if anyone wanted to reach out to you and check out your work or purchase your work, please let us know where they can go and where the best place to reach you is.
You can find me on Instagram. It's half and half without the L's. You can go to halfandhalf.com, or you can email me at hello@halfandhalf.com. I get back to people as soon as I'm able to.
Wonderful. Hafsa, it's been an absolute pleasure. We learned a lot from your wisdom. Ali, your wisdom today was shining more so than ever. So I'm just so honored. Can you pan the camera so we can see your view? I don't know. You said your laptop was like on charge.
Don't drop your laptop.
Wow. I know, that's what I'm worried about.
Nice. Oh wow.
Oh wow. Hold on. You know what? Let me just make it so I don't drop this thing. Okay.
Amazing. Wow.
Oh,
I feel like we're there with you.
Yeah.
Ali, appreciate it. Nice. Beautiful view. Thank you so much. All right, Hasnain, Ali, Hafsa, thank you guys so much. Inshallah, we'll see you guys again soon. That's it.
Thank you.
And that was a really fascinating discussion with the renowned artist Hafsa Khan. She, of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, was the one who designed our branding after my terribly poor attempt to design something. She really just came on and kind of pushed that away and really gave us something fantastic. So many thanks to her once again for that design. And of course, her art is fantastic, so do be sure to check it out, and you can purchase items on her store if you feel that any of them fit well in your home, which I'm sure they will. Do make sure you subscribe to us on all platforms. Like I said before, we are on Apple Podcasts, we are on Spotify, Anchor and YouTube. We have a new episode coming out approximately every single week, where we will continue to have some very interesting conversations at the confusing intersection of culture and spirituality. Thanks so much for joining us here at 786 Boulevard.